So when we have two categorical variables and not just one, what we just do all the time is count how many observations we have of each combination of the two variables. So for example, let's imagine we are interested in the room type over here and the neighborhood group over here. Then the numbers are just how many listings we have in each combination of room type and neighborhood. And so, for example, we see that in Mite, we have 534 entire homes, 379 private rooms, and 24 shared rooms. Now, it's just, again, counting. Very often, again, we're going to be interested rather in the proportions. So out of the total number of observations, which in this case are 5,000, what we see here is the percentage for each of those combinations. So we see, I don't know, over here, just shy over 1%, we have private rooms and Treptow. And something like 12% are entire homes and Panko, etc., etc. Now, yeah, it's useful to look into these percentages, but it's more useful if we look into conditional percentage or conditional marginal proportions. So the idea is that if we take rows, then each of them is going to sum to 100%. So in this case, what we're looking at is at the distribution of room type by neighborhood group. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about Spandau. What we have here is 50% of the observation in Spandau belong to entire homes, and 50% of the observations belong to private rooms. There are no shared rooms. If we look into Mitte, we have 57% of them are entire homes, a little over 40% are private rooms, and just under 3% are shared rooms. So this is telling us what is the distribution within each of the neighborhoods. And of course, we might be interested in just the opposite. What is the distribution of neighborhoods per room type? And it looks something like this. So now the columns sum to 100%. And if we are, for example, interested in the private rooms, we see that 27% of the total private rooms are in Friedrichshain, and I don't know, 50% of them are in Pankow, 20% are in Newcomb, 6.5% are in Tempelhof. If we are interested, for example, in shared rooms, we see that half of all the rooms that are shared, they are in the neighborhood of Mitte. So again, this is very useful if we want to look at the distribution, in this case, of neighborhood groups per room type. One variable conditioned on the value of the other variable. And of course, we can visualize as well, and we can use bar plots just like we did before. And here in the left, we have again a flipped bar plot in which we have neighborhood groups over there, the number of observations over here, and we're just using a different color in this case, or a different shade of gray, whatever you want, a way to differentiate between different room types. And so this is allowing us to see, for example, that in Friedrichshain, we have about 50% private rooms, 50% entire homes, but nonetheless, we see what the overall shape of the distribution is, that most of them are in Friedrichshain, and then Pankow, Newcomb, Mitte, etc., etc. So it's going to give us, again, the bar plot, which is the rough distribution of the neighborhoods, but within neighborhood, which is the distribution of room types, of color in this case. And we see that virtually everything is green and red, so private rooms and entire homes. Some other times we might be interested, instead of stacking the colors one on top of the other, just putting them side by side. So we see here in Pankow, what we saw earlier, yeah, there's about twice as many entire homes than private rooms. Out over here that we were not sure whether this was 50-50 or 45-55, we were not sure. We can just come over here and we see it, that green is the lower one, red is the higher one. And so it's just different visualizations of the same data that might uncover different insights. It's just about choosing the one that is best for what we want to communicate. And the question is, when should we use one or the other? Well, it depends on what you want to compare. If you want to compare, in this case, neighborhoods, then most often you use the one in the left because it's stacking all the room types. And so the total height of the bar is going to allow you to compare across neighborhoods. If you want to compare within neighborhoods, then normally you use the one on the right because you're not stacking the bars and you see side by side the different room types within the neighborhood so you can compare. And you can compare, for example, private rooms across the neighborhoods because you just look at the height of the green bars or the height of the red bars. So it might be useful to look at one or the other depending on what is the comparison that you want to focus on. And finally, we could make it such that everything sums up to 100%, in this case, per neighborhood group. So what we're looking at is the proportion, actually, not the count, but the proportion. So this is telling us that about 40% of the observations, or 30 something, in Charlottenburg are private rooms. So 40% is probably a lot easier to grasp than, I don't know, 529 observations out of the total. And so what we see here is within neighborhoods, a good comparison of the relative frequency of private rooms and entire homes apartments. And of course, shared rooms, which are very difficult to see, but they are around here. So again, we just choose whatever shows best what we want to show. We could also use heat maps, which are a visual representation of these counts, but just in a grid. So essentially, we have all the neighborhoods along the y-axis, all the room types along the x-axis, and in each of the cells, we have a different color. In this case, the lighter the blue, the more observations, the darker the blue, the fewer observations. And in here, what we see is that most of the observations in the dataset are here, entire homes in Friedrichshain, and there are very few observations in there, etc., etc. Of course, reordering the different categories, the different neighborhoods in this case, might show even further patterns. It just depends on the case.